To Kathy's call. Hon, come on in. Come in close. Today I want to walk you through um, my heart about healing. And that sounds funny, but it really is my passion. There's a lot of other things that I teach on, but this one just really comes from a very inside place. Today I want to talk to you about the 3 different ways we can be sick, the 3 different ways we can be well, and I want to tell you my story so that you'll believe me. Okay? So there's 3 different ways. God created us to be 3 different things. He created us to be body and mind and spirit, and each of them are completely different. Very similar to the Trinity, though, although they're separate, they work in connection with one another. They're very closely connected. And the same thing happens in your body, mind, and spirit. They are separate, but they are so interwoven and interconnected that each one can demonstrate an illness or a sickness, and yet that's not the source of the illness or sickness. So, let me give you an example. So there's a thing that's called conversion disorder. And a conversion disorder is very common, actually. What happens is the brain can't process the stress level that it's going through. And so rather than have you cry or have you be sad or have you be depressed or get angry, what it does is it kind of leaks it out through your body. And so what happens is you have a lot of physical symptoms, pain, discomfort, sometimes just parts of you don't work right. And so you're going to your doctor and your doctor's testing your body from head to toe, and he goes, there's nothing wrong with your body. Your body is performing the way it's supposed to perform. I'm sorry that you're hurt. I'm sorry that isn't working. I'm sorry that your back isn't right. I'm sorry that you're in pain all the time, and I'm sorry that your stomach doesn't work, but there's actually nothing wrong with you. And you get this feeling like, I'm losing my mind. But what's happened is that body-mind-spirit connection is so strong that what's happening in your mind is leaking into your body. And so all those tests will come back normal. So if you've had that, and there's lots of you that have had it, you've done all the tests. Every test says there's nothing wrong, but you are in pain and can't function. You need to look at the other parts of your triangle. So God not only heals physical body, he heals mind and he heals spirit. And so when we aren't well, when we're not well, it really doesn't matter which part isn't working, does it? It really doesn't matter. I can tell you that's how conversion disorder works, but does it really matter to you? It still hurts? Does it really matter where the pain is coming from? No, it doesn't. And we don't even need to know necessarily the source of the problem to ask for God to heal. And so I can just tell you that, and you can be like, oh yeah, well, Kathy told me, but that's not likely to work with you. So I want to give you an example. I want to share with you how God came in and healed my triangle when I didn't even know that that's what was going on. This was before I understood how brain science works. This is before I understood how that triangle works and how the 3 work so well together when we're well and so poorly together when we're not well. And I am a very firm believer that if you're hurting, if you are struggling with health, you need to look at that whole triangle. Because when we look at the statistics, okay, so let's just take statistics, just one small statistic. And we say that, so the statistics say between 25 to 50% of young women have been sexually abused prior to the age of 18, sorry. And that doesn't include anything that happens after that. You know, if there was date rape or, you know, some spousal abuse, it doesn't, it's just in childhood and just sexual abuse. So that means that 25 to 50% of the women walking on this planet, and the percentages would change depending on where you live, are already damaged in that triangle. That triangle has already been traumatized. And that's just that one thing. You know, we haven't talked about physical abuse, emotional abuse. We haven't talked about alcohol or drug abuse. We haven't talked about spousal abuse. All of these things, well, they kind of just all say to me that we're all hurting somewhere. And we can go through life continuing to just hurt and not deal with it and not think that there's even anything better. But I want to give you the hope that God has a better plan. God has a better plan for you. So I want to tell you my story. And I probably should have had a chair to sit down in because I feel very teachery standing up here. But this is a very personal story. And the fact that I am standing is part of the miracle. So let me take you back. We could probably go all the way back to the beginning, but I'll try and rush through the first parts. I was one of those girls who were sexually abused before she was 18, several times. I have a lot of trauma in that area of my life that still, in some ways, still continues to affect my life, but not in the way that it used to. So just know that that was a broken part of my triangle when I tell you the story. Well, actually, this is my 10-year anniversary. 10 years ago, I was working in a long-term care facility, working nights. I loved it. I really loved that job. It was an amazing job. In about January of 2010, I started to experience really bad back pain. And it started just as a sort of a nagging thing, and then it just continued to escalate. And not only in intensity, but duration of time. It would last for hours, and eventually got to the point where it was a constant pain that often kept me awake. Months later, the headaches started, and headaches that would literally stop me in the middle of a room. I literally could not walk or move when I had these headaches. The pain was so intense. So I was already working nights and really getting very little sleep outside of that, which continues to compound all of our health issues anyway. But as that year progressed, I had more symptoms. I had difficulties with balance. I had very diminished strength as well. And I went to my doctor because it became very clear I was not going to be able to keep working. And he did a couple of tests. He came back. He said, I can't find anything wrong. I don't know what's wrong with you. And pretty much washed his hands of me. Do you have doctors that do that? Yeah. I've had a few doctors that weren't like that, but most of them tend to be like, I can't figure it out. Okay, next. But anyway, I hope you have a good doctor. But I didn't have a good doctor at that time. But as I finally had to make the decision to leave work, because here I am looking after senior citizens, and they're walking faster than me and have a better balance than me. Not a good mix, I'm telling you. So I did go on sick leave. Now I have to tell you another piece of my story, and that is that before I was even a Christian, I heard God. I don't mean audibly. I mean, I heard him in my mind. I knew it was God. I just hadn't made the decision to follow Christ. So I was not a Christian yet, but I did hear God. And mostly what I heard from God was, you need to tell your story. And I was just like, nobody wants to hear my story, God. It's not a nice story. There's no happy ending. It's a terrible story. Who would want to hear a story like this? But he would continue and continue and continue to poke at me and say, tell your story. Tell your story. I need you to tell your story. And really, I think sort of my passion about writing came out of that, because I began to write down things that I was thinking and feeling. But still, I was very much like, no, God, I'm not doing this. This is a terrible story. I don't see any reason how you could use this story. And in this year, when my health was becoming worse and worse, although I was searching and looking for the physical reason for that illness, I have to tell you that in the back of my mind, there was this thought, maybe this is God making me stop. Maybe this is God trying to get my attention. And I can't say it was like a constant thought, but it was there. It was there. I really had that thought in my head, was that maybe God's doing something. And I really wasn't sure until one day I actually got the phone number for a lady who, yeah, it's weird how things connect in those times, but she was just a lady who helped people with things were going on in their life, I guess. By this time I was a Christian and she was a Christian, so that was another thing that drew me to her. So I phoned her up. And it was only about a 5-minute conversation, but she said 2 things to me that I'm sure she didn't know the depth of what they meant, but I knew exactly what they meant. And the first thing she said was, you're on a plateau, and God wants me to tell you that he's loved you from the very beginning. And you can see how that still gets me, because I knew exactly what that meant. That was God saying, I still want you to tell your story. And that the story was his. He'd been there through all of it. So I was now convinced that God was doing something. I didn't know what it was going to be. And really, I didn't care. At this point in time, I was desperate. And I was willing. And God loves desperate and willing. God can use desperate and willing. By this time, I couldn't walk without help. We were probably within days of getting me a walker because of how fast I was declining. Bars in the bathrooms, like, I couldn't lift a plate or a cup, couldn't get in and out of a vehicle. But I knew God was doing something. And I gotta tell you, at that point, I didn't even think that he was gonna heal me. That wasn't even the thought that was in my mind. I just knew he was doing something. And we attended church. This is all happening within a couple of days. But anyway, we attended church that Sunday. And we had sat at the very back because I made sure that we arrived late so no one would see me walking so poorly and needing so much help, and sat at the very back so no one would notice me. And as I sat down, all of a sudden I couldn't see. And I turned to my husband and I said, I can't see. And I just started to cry. And the service went on for maybe a couple more minutes. And then a friend of mine stood up in the middle of the pastor's sermon and she said, "Pastor Larry, we have to stop you. We need to pray for Kathy." She was like 10 rows ahead of me. I don't even know how she knew I was there. And God bless him. He stopped the service. And everyone gathered around and laid their hands on me. And it was the very first time I ever heard someone speak in tongues. It was the very first time I ever heard someone praying to the Holy Spirit. I never had any experience with that at all. I had no grid for it. I didn't even know what I thought of it, whether it was good, bad, or otherwise. It was just, I just cried through it. And when I opened my eyes, I could see. And if I hadn't been convinced before, I was now absolutely convinced that God was trying to get my attention. So I phoned that lady. Her name was Tammy, and I phoned her. I asked her if we could talk longer. And so we had set up that it would happen at these certain days, and like all within a week. So that was Sunday. I think I was already there by Thursday. So this all happened pretty quick. But I'm not easy to transport, so just by fluke of who could drive and who couldn't and who could help and who couldn't, I ended up at the place a day early. And we were sitting down to dinner, and Tammy mentioned that she was going to head to her church for a session on, I think it was intercessory prayer. And I said, "Hey, could I go?" And she's like, "Sure." God bless her. She had no idea what she was in for, because moving me was not a simple task. It took me a very long time to walk across a room. I needed a lot of help, and getting in and out of vehicles was very, very difficult. And if the ground, like if there was a carpet over hardwood or something like that, and there was a difference in the floor, I would have to stand there for a second just to catch my balance. Like she was a saint. But we went in, and it turned out that the topic wasn't actually about intercessory prayer at all. It was about healing from past hurts and generational hurt. And wow, that was like, it hit so close to home. And so we had a very powerful evening of hearing of this teaching, and then there was this prayer time, and Tammy and I prayed for each other, and we just went through a lot just in those 2 hours. And it really bonded us, I think, which was absolutely vital for where we were going. See, I knew where we were going. Tammy didn't, but I knew. See, all those horrible things that had happened to me as a child, they don't go away. People might think that, you have decades of time, you should just have written over those memories, but they don't go away. And they're very painful, so you have to put them somewhere. You can't erase them, and you can't have them constantly on your mind, so you have to put them somewhere. So in my mind, they were behind a black curtain. I know other people have talked about putting them in boxes or burying them, or, there's some sort of visual way that we kind of put these memories aside. And in my mind, they were behind a black curtain. And you don't touch the curtain. You don't look at the curtain. You don't give it any attention. It's there. And I can tell you that although that was in my mind, it was like in the peripheral of my vision. Every single day I saw that curtain. And I knew behind that curtain, if I opened that curtain, if I touched those things behind the curtain, there was a huge chasm there, and I would just fall. And I would just keep falling and falling, and there was never a bottom. I don't know how I knew all that. I never tried it, but I knew it. I knew it. And after everything that God had shown me this week, I knew He wanted me to open that curtain. Wow. It was going to be a dark place, and I didn't know what would happen. But I knew I couldn't ignore God any longer. He'd made it so painfully obvious that He was trying to talk to me, that He needed me to tell my story, and He was willing to go through all of this effort. I didn't expect anything out of that weekend but that curtain. So Tammy didn't know where we were headed, but I did. And so us bonding that night really helped, because I was about to tell her stuff I'd never told anybody else. So we went into her prayer room the next day, and God had already convinced me what I needed to do. And now I had someone to do it with. Because in the valleys of our lives, God walks through them with us. But He also sends people to go with us. And so that was Tammy. Oh, sorry. Gotta tell the story without blathering through it. Anyway. So I began to tell my story. I began to open that curtain and touch those memories. And I can't describe that day as anything more than tumbling and falling. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done. And when we got to the end of the day, I guess I'd found bottom. I didn't feel fabulous, but I hadn't fallen and kept falling. It had actually stopped. The next morning, we started to go through things again, but this time we went through them with sort of this intention of stopping and praying and asking forgiveness. And so I would ask forgiveness for myself, and maybe that doesn't make sense to some of you, but any of you who have had the shame of having that done to you, you have guilt. You already have it. No one needs to, and to sweep it away doesn't help. We need to get rid of it, and we do that through asking forgiveness. Also, when you've been that traumatized, you make poor decisions. You make decisions that continue to hurt you. And so I continued my story with telling some of the bad mistakes that I had made, and I asked forgiveness for those. I also asked forgiveness for holding on to this anger and this shame and the guilt. And I asked God to forgive my abusers. And the ability to forgive them, because forgiveness isn't about letting somebody off the hook. It's about letting you off the hook. It's about you no longer being tied to that person. There's no spiritual connection between you anymore. And that you can't accomplish any other way. So that's what we did that day, was we worked through all these people that had hurt me and forgiveness and those types of things. And Tammy had asked me one point in time, she's like, hey, how's that curtain? And I said, it's gone. I can't even see it. Like, I go to look for it in my mind. It's not even there. There's no curtain. She's like, what about that chasm, that big hole? I'm at the bottom. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm at the bottom. And as we left that session, I went to God and I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm at the bottom. Like, I don't know where to go from here. I feel so empty. Like, I don't know what to do. And God directed me to Psalm 23. And now, I used to have Psalm 23 memorized a long, long time ago. I've read it a lot. And so I read through it and I went, there, God, I read it. And he said, read it again. And I read it, there, God, and he said, read it again. Okay, so I read it again. Read it again. I'm like, what am I missing? And so I started to go through line by line by line. And I have about 800 Bibles here. So let's just pull one out here. This is King James. Hopefully that doesn't offend anyone. You can tell how well prepared I was for this. Okay. So I read through each line, and I began to see a different picture than the way that I'd ever read it before. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. And I went, I've never seen a mountaintop with green pastures and still waters. Ever. Green pastures and still waters are for valleys. And God said, that's why I led you here. You call it the valley of the shadow of the death, but that's only because you stay. I don't want you to stay in the valleys. I just want you to go there, get what you need, take a rest, recoup, and move on. So I said, just get up and move on. I will guide you through this. And I was like, God, but this is a valley that I don't know how to climb out of. And he said, I created the valley. I created the valley. I know every step, every rock, every path, every blade of grass. I've walked it. Jesus said, I've walked it. I walked it already. I've already made the path. Just follow. Just put one foot in front of the other and follow the path that I've already made to get out of the valley. So the next day, we just did a lot more prayer and talking about getting out of that valley. And Tammy said to me another thing. She said, I hear God calling you a warrior princess. And I got to tell you, when I went back and I researched my name Kathy Joyce. So Joyce means tested in battle, and Kathy means pure. And Princess Warrior just seemed to fit. And we talked about, where do we go from here? What is God calling me to do? And I really started to get a really strong picture of how God wanted to heal other women who had been through what I'd been through. And we ended around, it was just before supper, I guess. And I just said to her, I said, I just need a minute. I just need to just be with God for a bit. And so she left the room, and I turned on some worship music, and as soon as I heard it, I was thrown to my knees on the floor and just wept there, praising God, because He had taken the curtain, this horrible curtain that had wounded me far more than the abuse ever did. It was gone. I couldn't even see it. I couldn't even find it. It wasn't haunting me. And after several minutes on the floor, I sort of came to this realization that I was kind of in big trouble, because I had help walking in. I had help getting into the chair. I needed help getting in and out of bed. I couldn't hold a plate or a cup. I couldn't do anything on my own. And here I am on my knees. Now, not only would it be impossible for me to get up, but for someone to come in and help me get up was going to be extremely difficult. And I was like, I am screwed. Like, nobody can hear me. What am I going to do here? And I just kind of, I don't know, I think it's okay to be flippant with God sometimes. And I just kind of went to God and I said, well, you got me here. What are you going to do about it? You're going to have to get me out. And so I well, all I can do is try. And I pulled one knee up. I was like, okay. And then I pulled the other knee up. And then I stood. And I didn't need a wall. And I didn't need help. And I went, holy crap, what the heck just happened? And I was like, I'm going to try and walk. So I did. I walked across the room, and then I walked back, and I went, okay, something really weird just happened. And the worship music is still going, and so I proceeded to twirl. It seemed the best expression of my joy. And so I kind of peeked out the door, and I went, hey, Tammy, I need you for a second. And she came down the hall, and she opened the door, and I twirled. And we cried. And I was staying at my mom's at the time, and so I walked down the hall into the kitchen, and I twirled. And we cried. I never asked God to heal me. Never actually put that into words. And I never expected what He did with the curtain. But I was so grateful. And that would have been enough for me. If I'd been in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, that would have been enough. But God said, to prove what I did in your heart, I made you walk. And it reminded me of the paralytic, and so how Jesus said, first, your sins are forgiven. And when no one believed that He did that, He said, okay, walk. And that is what God did. He reached in and found the deepest hurt in me, and He took it away. And then He gave me legs to walk so that I could share that with you, and you might believe me. I hope that that is a testimony that makes you start to think that God can do something really powerful in your life too. And if it is, I want you to drop me a line here. I want you to tell me your story. I want you to tell me what you need help with. Because on this page, that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring light into darkness. We're going to take the light of Christ and we're going to bring it into all those dark and terrible corners where Satan has ruled in our lives, stolen our peace and our joy and our health. I know there's so many of you women out there who are suffering with pain or inability, and it doesn't matter what you try, it doesn't work. I just want to remind you of that triangle, because what's happening in your spirit and in your mind can express itself in your body. And that means that you can throw all the medicine in the world at it and it won't touch anything, because your body actually isn't broken. So you need to look at your spirit and your mind. And we're going to talk a lot more about those things, but I wanted you to know that this is my heart. This is my testimony of how Jesus healed me. And I have more. I have more exciting stories to tell you. So God bless. Love you.